Okay, welcome back. This is section 4. We're going to be covering an area called the North Africa Southwest Asian realm. And then we will also be covering the rest of Africa separately next week. That's called the Sub-Saharan realm. So first, let's talk about what we're covering this week. You just kind of actually zoom out a little bit and look at what we've covered so far. We've covered from the North American realm through Middle America, South America, when last section was on Europe and Russia and Central Asia. And now we're moving a bit south. We're covering this pocket here, which is called Southwest Asia, and the realm extends across through North Africa. And if you look at this hatching here, what that means is that it's kind of a transitional zone between what we're covering up here and what we're going to cover next week, which is Sub-Saharan Africa. So looking back, we have the countries from Iran and Turkey, down through Saudi Arabia, and then across North Africa from Egypt, all the way across the northern part of Africa. Now, what is and isn't included down here is kind of a judgment call because this is a transitional zone, but we're going to be covering some of these countries. We'll cover more next week. We're probably going to focus more upon those that are right up along the edge here near the Mediterranean. As a reminder, make sure you know your concepts, ideas, and terms. I've highlighted some that we'll be covering, and then there will be other ones from the reading as well. Okay, so I mentioned this transitional zone here between the area we're covering this week, North Africa, Southwest Asia. Sometimes we just shorten that to NASWA. Sometimes we call it the Middle East. And we'll talk about why that name is correct or not correct in a moment, but I'll often revert back to using it because it's such a common way to describe this part of the world. And then next week we'll be covering the rest of Africa south of the Sahara Desert, called Sub-Saharan Africa. Okay, let me show this graphic. It actually changes, has a couple of seasons in August and February, and winter and summer, and a few things I want to highlight. Up here in Europe, it's relatively green along the edge of Turkey up here, and it's also mountainous up here. You get some snow in the wintertime. And as we move south into Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and so on, it's relatively dry. And this large patch around here, this is the Sahara Desert. It's probably the largest continuous desert in the world, and it's extremely dry. So you can see not much green going on here. Most of the green is kind of up around the edge near the Mediterranean or along river valleys, such as the Nile River here, and also the Tigris and Euphrates here in Iraq. Now, as we get further south, the colors change, and this is the other part of Africa that we'll be covering next week, which is Africa that's south of the Sahara Desert. That transitional zone is in an area called the Sahel. And we'll be talking more about the Sahel, the transition zone, next week. But this is the Sahara here, with the Sahel dividing it from the other part of Africa. A little bit on terminology, that normally this part of the world is called the Middle East. And so Southwest Asia, including Egypt, oftentimes we'll get the label the Middle East. And that really comes from being in Europe. So this is what we call a Eurocentric term, where relative to Europe, you had Turkey, which was the Near East, you had Southwest Asia, which is the Middle East, and then you had South, and you have the East Asian countries, which would be the Far East. But to be a little bit more clear, since this is the Asian continent and this is the southwest corner of it, we call it Southwest Asia. And this part here is simply the northern part of Africa. So it's not really relative to Europe, it's more relative to the continents themselves. These are some of the sub-regions that we'll cover. And I just want to highlight one in particular here, which, because the name Middle East is so common, they just couldn't help but use it for one of the sub-regions that we'll be covering. The other parts include what's called the Empire States. This includes Turkey and Iran, the Arabian Peninsula, the area near Egypt and the Nile, and then also what's called the Maghreb, which is sort of this edge of North Africa and its neighbors. So just a little bit about North Africa, Southwest Asia in particular, that this area is a crossroads of humanity. And it is sort of the corner link between Africa and the Eurasian landmass, which includes Europe and Asia. And historically, it's been a center of trade between West and East, or East and West. That if you recall, we've talked about the Silk Road in the past. The Silk Road really is hinged right here in the Middle East. So this has been a center of trade for a long period of time. And when you read the chapter, the main overview of it, that there's sort of three conceptions about this part of the world. That this is a dry world, this is an Arab world, or is this the Islamic world? And we're going to look at those three questions. We're going to use that kind of as a lens to try to look at how maybe this is a dry world, but maybe not altogether dry. That this is an area that is what we might call an Arab world, but there are exceptions to that. And then also we'll look at it in terms of being the Islamic world, where it is an important part of the Islamic religion, but it is not the only. So just some general overview of the countries and their population. Let's take a look at some of the larger countries in the realm. The largest is Egypt here, with a population of nearly 100 million, but not quite. And then beyond that, the Turkey and Iran are countries of around 80 million, roughly the population of Germany, but growing faster than Germany for reasons we've discussed. So the areas in this part of the world don't have the same demographic issues that we have in Western Europe. Their populations are steadily growing. In fact, I just had to update this slide, and it was quite a bit different than what I had before. Now, one thing I want to highlight though, so this is Egypt here. This is the most populated country, but this is a figure showing population density, where this is this kind of light yellow color are very low densities, and the red color are very high densities. So one thing to note is that the population of Egypt, even though Egypt is a fairly large in terms of area country, the population is highly concentrated. And that has a lot to do with the geographic setting of Egypt. Egypt is extremely dry. The population is concentrated along water resources, namely the Nile River here and its delta. Okay, and more later.